गुड इवनिंग एंड वेलकम टू गनर शॉट। गनर शॉट में आप सबको दोबारा स्वागत है। आज हम चाइना के स्ट्रेटेजिक मिलिट्री पोस्चर एंड मिलिट्री डायनेमिक्स के बारे में बात करेंगे और ये बहुत ही इंपॉर्टेंट टॉपिक है। राइट, ये बहुत ही इंपॉर्टेंट टॉपिक है बहुत दृष्टिकोणों से। और इसके लिए ये टॉपिक को डिस्कस करने के लिए हमारे साथ आज जनरल राज शुक्ला हैं। General Raj Shukla, welcome to the show and a very good
Thank you,
evening
sir.
to you.
Thank you,
Right.
and it's a great pleasure to be on Gunner's Shot. Thank you for the opportunity and the invite. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. इससे पहले कि मैं आगे बढ़ूं, I want to put across that General Raj Shukla is at this point of time a member of the UPSC. He's also been the army commander in the Indian Army. And most importantly for me, it's a matter of pride that he is my fellow gunner. Right? So we're going to have two gunners blazing away at you and watch out China. Right? Having said that, what we're going to do is, uh, Raj, you can give an opening statement on China. Then I'll set the, base for what we're going to talk, and then you go about it, and then we'll pick it up later. So let's have your opening views on China and what we're going to speak of.
So, sir, let me say this: that China, to me, I mean, it is indeed the flavor of the strategic season, if such a coinage does exist. क्योंकि सब लोग चाइना की बात करते हैं, and the commentariat on China is growing. The commentaries in China today are wide-ranging and profuse. बहुत कुछ लिखा जा रहा है, बहुत कुछ बोला जा रहा है चाइना के बारे में. There are those that say and explain how we got China wrong. Aaron Friedberg की एक बड़ी अच्छी किताब निकली है, How We Got China Wrong, which actually says how the West got China wrong. There was this expectation कि China एक democracy बनेगी, हमारी तरह बनेगी, but China has become a power in its own right. China शक्तिशाली हो गया, but कहता है साहब we are going to do it our way, which is the communist way. They have an ideology of their own. एक दूसरा रुख ये है लोगों का, Susan Shirk है, उन्होंने किताब लिखी है Overreach, which says that how China through a perilous overreach risks derailing its own rise. So शायद China is also, in overreach. It may big power,
A very good point.
Ambitions to an early end. Then there are those that consistently predict its demise. बहुत सालों से लोग कहते हैं साहब चाइना की इकोनॉमी अभी गायब हो जाएगी, अभी ये बबल बर्स्ट होगा, बट होता नहीं और हुआ नहीं है अभी तक. So that is also one thing that we should examine. And there are those that the former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, who says that China has strategically ceased to exist in this hide and bide mode, and has consciously gone loud and proud.
Yes.
Which means that they are consciously becoming, aggressive in their foreign policy and assertive in their domestic foreign policy, in the domestic policy. तो ये 4-5 पहलू हैं और इनको पृष्ठभूमि में रखते हुए, with that as the backdrop, what I propose to do is try and examine with you, sir, that what exactly is the nature and character of the Chinese power juggernaut, this strategic military beast, है क्या ये? And through a discursive analysis, 5 strands of thought.
Yeah, we'll come to that. We'll just come to that. Yeah. Right. I think you put a lot of things in context. आपने बहुत चीज सही दृश्य में डाल दिया है. मैं एक और पहलू में इंट्रोड्यूस करना चाहता हूं, वो घरेलू पहलू है. जिस तरीके से चाइना बदल रहा है उसी तरीके से इंडिया भी बदल रहा है. राइट. लोग कहते हैं चाइना फ्लैट हो गया, बहुत लोग कहते हैं डिक्लाइन हो गया, कुछ लोग कहते हैं राइज जारी रहेगा. वो उसका डिस्कशन जारी रहेगा फॉर अ लॉन्ग टाइम टू कम. बट जो चीज यू कैन नॉट deny is India is rising. And when you have a rising India and a powerful China, because China is already powerful, on that we should have no doubts, right? There's going to be uh, some kind of friction, some kind of contest, some kind of conflict. We don't know what. So our entire examination has to be based on the fact that how you examine China and what is it there for it in India and how do we behave with China and how do we behave as a power in rise. Right. Now, to set the context as to what General Raj Shukla is going to speak to us about, I'm going to take you into this article. ये जो article है, ये Foreign Affairs magazine में आया. यो इसका heading है Xi Jinping says he is preparing China for war. It's by John Pomfrey and Matt Pottinger, well-known research people. The striking thing about this article, जो वो बोलते हैं कि we need to take Xi Jinping seriously. Why should we take Xi Jinping seriously? जब Xi Jinping ने पद संभाला 2012 में, उन्होंने बोला कि मैं I will follow the Marxist, Leninist, Maoist way of life, communism, back to that. He said, I will prefer the public over the private sectors. और उस वक्त China was expected to be opening up, as General Raj Shukla has said, expected it to become democratic. And they thought Xi Jinping was just poodle faking. But 10 साल बाद अभी चाइना का रुख बदल गया है, काफी बदल गया है. उसी तरीके से पिछले 10 साल से ये बोल रहे हैं कि ही इज प्रिपेयरिंग चाइना फॉर वॉर. जहां भी बोलते हैं कि भाई लड़ाई के लिए तैयार रहो. तो अगर वो बोल रहे हैं कि चाइना इज प्रिपेयरिंग फॉर वॉर, वी शुड टेक हिम सीरियसली. राइट. ओके, व्हाई शुड इंडिया टेक हिम सीरियसली? दूसरा सवाल है, क्या हर रोज ये कहीं ना कहीं लेक आता है कि ये ताइवान की तरह देख रहे हैं, पर इंडिया की तरफ क्यों देखेंगे वो 2 मिनट में मैं बताऊंगा. पर अगर आप चाइना का हिस्ट्री देखोगे, रीसेंट हिस्ट्री, पिछले 10 साल का हिस्ट्री, उनका मैक्सिमम झड़प इंडिया के साथ हुआ है. मिलिट्री कॉन्फ्लिक्ट हैज बीन मैक्सिमम बिटवीन चाइना एंड इंडिया, एंड दैट इज व्हाई वी हैव टू टेक Xi Jinping seriously. Right. There is this article in Rand का analysis के मुताबिक, this is called the splendid war theory. I'll just read it out in 2 minutes. When a nation ascends to the status of a leading international power, it often feels the need to publicly demonstrate its rise through a brief victorious war. इसके मुताबिक China is increasing strength, may tempted to pursue such a conflict and not necessarily with Taiwan. ये जरूरी नहीं है कि China will fight with Taiwan. China may believe a quick and decisive military could help to establish the perception that it is not only an economic power of the first rank, but also a military one. A quick victory could reinforce popular perception that the Communist Party had made China proud, strong, as well as wealthy. और यही चीज Xi Jinping साहब का उद्देश्य है. China could use its massive ground forces while also testing its burgeoning air, maritime, cyberspace, and electronic warfare capabilities for future use. China may anticipate, ये last point देखिए, China may anticipate that victory against India or Vietnam could elevate perceptions of its military prowess and enable it to hone its forces for future combat with Taiwan, USA, जो भी है. पर ये सब करने के लिए इनका जो स्प्लेंडेड वॉर, लिटिल वॉर थियरी में इंडिया इज ऑन द टारगेट, इंडिया एंड वियतनाम. और जैसे मैंने पहले बताया, अगर हिस्ट्री देखोगे तो इट इज विद इंडिया. ओके, व्हाई इंडिया? इंडिया क्यों? इसीलिए क्योंकि हमारा आबादी चाइना से ज्यादा बढ़ गया है. एक लिमिटेड वॉर अगर इंडिया के साथ हो गया और हमें दबा दिया, तो चाइना विल बी एबल टू रीअसर्ट इटसेल्फ डोमेस्टिकली एंड इंटरनेशनली। उनको पता है इंडिया इज द ओनली ग्लोबल ऑल्टरनेटिव टू चाइना इन स्केल एंड साइज, तो इंडिया के को दबाना पड़ेगा। हमारा जो आर्थिक राइज है इज एट चाइनाज एक्सपेंस। अगर हम ऊपर उठेंगे, हम और उबर के आएंगे, तो चाइना नीचे जाना पड़ेगा रिलेटिवली। दूसरी चौथा बात यह है कि चाइनीज वेसल्स इन द इंडियन ओशन कुड प्रोवोक देयर इंडियन काउंटरपार्ट्स एज दे हैव डन टू वेसल्स इन अदर एशियन नेशंस, जैसे साउथ चाइना सी में हो रहा है। अगर वो हो गया तो इंडियन ओशन में उनका बोलबाला ज्यादा बढ़ाने के लिए कुछ ना कुछ झड़प हो सकता है। पाकिस्तान कुड स्टेज एन इंसिडेंट दैट ड्रॉज इन चाइनीज फोर्सेस, क्योंकि पाकिस्तान और चाइना का गठबंधन इज वेरी लीथल, राइट, एंड इट इज अम्बिलिकल, गहरा है। और ये हमने पाकिस्तान के एनालिसिस में पिछले हफ्ते देखा है। The two giants get far over influence in Nepal, Sri Lanka and other parts of Sri Lanka, South Asia, जो ऑलरेडी हो रहा है। इसमें भूटान नहीं है, भूटान भी इंक्लूडेड है। Last, Chinese Communist Party can attempt to manipulate the identification of the 87-year-old Dalai Lama's next incarnation. इनका जो नेक्स्ट दलाई लामा होगा, अगर हम आइडेंटिफाई करेंगे तो चाइना को प्रॉब्लम होगा, चाइना आइडेंटिफाई करेंगे तो हमें प्रॉब्लम होगा। तो दिस कुड लीड टू अ वॉर। इसको मद्देनजर रखते हुए आज इसीलिए मैंने जनरल राज शुक्ला को रिक्वेस्ट किया, और जो वो बोल रहे थे वो देखेंगे कि चाइना का मिलिट्री प्रोग्रेस क्या है, उसका फ्यूचर पावर डायनेमिक्स क्या है। मोटे मोटे तौर पर उन्होंने बताया कि वो बात करेंगे हमारे साथ चाइना द बबल दैट नेवर पॉप्स, द इम्पोर्टेंट ग्रेविटी ऑफ द चाइना चैलेंज फ्रॉम नॉट ओनली इंटरनेशनल पर्सपेक्टिव, हमारे पर्सपेक्टिव से भी, द साइनो अमेरिकन कॉन्टेक्स्ट, कौन जीत रहा है और कौन जीत सकता है और इंडिया क्या करना है। और ये मेरे लिए सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट इशू है, राइट। ये कहते हुए I'd like to hand over the stage to General Raj Shukla. Raj, all yours. Please take it away.
थैंक यू सर। जो आपने सबसे पहले ये बात बताई about the possibility of a Sino-Indian clash, उसमें मैं दो तीन चीजें कहना चाहता हूँ।
Please.
कि one way to see it, look at it, is that China and India, they have their own geostrategic spaces. Why should they clash? China can grow, India can grow. That is a hope. But in the real geopolitical world, I'm told that for the first time in history, you have two powers, the world's number 1 and number 3 economies in PPP terms, growing together and in proximity. इससे पहले इतिहास में जब भी ऐसे दो पावर्स की बढ़ोतरी हुई है, they have been geographically distanced. For the first time, they are in geographic proximity. Their geostrategic trajectories are bound to clash unless India ensures that it creates such deterrence that this clash will be peaceful. अभी अमृत काल के सिलसिले में एक बात कहना चाहता हूँ। देखिए, there is much to suggest that India is the geopolitical toast of the times. There is much in India's favor. We can rattle off a whole host of statistics to say, I mean, right from The Economist to Morgan and Stanley. Many people have said this is India's economy.
बहुत बोल चुके हैं कि India will become, is rising very fast.
एक दो चीजें हमने जहन में रखनी है। एक, अमृत काल between now and 2047 coincides with China's objective 2049 wala, where it hopes to become the world's greatest power. हमारे लिए भी urgency ये है that ये 25 साल हमारे लिए महत्वपूर्ण इसलिए हैं because we must make sure that we become rich before we become old. Now, given all these compulsions, there is a possibility of our geostrategic trajectories clashing. One thing that could derail Amrit Kal is a national security reversal. इसलिए हमको इस पे बहुत गौर करना है, and that is why this subject may be of interest to us, where we are assessing China's entire power
Yes.
potential, its geostrategic poise, so as to see what could be the possible impact in on India. So, is sandarbh mein, now let's get on with the topic.
Yeah.
And the first issue that I want to examine is to why China is the bubble that never pops. ये मेरा हेडलाइन नहीं है, ये हेडलाइन एक किताब से है जो थॉमस ऑर्लिक ने लिखी है, where he argues that China is the bubble that never pops. और वो कहते क्या हैं, that is very important. He says that bears have written off the chances of continued Chinese success again and again. But they have always been proved wrong. तमाम मुश्किलों के बावजूद, against many odds, many expectations, China has sustained its momentum through 4 economic cycles. Its growth continues, its wealth rises, its international influence expands. And Thomas Orlick in this wonderful book concludes by saying that the collapse of China is always coming but never arriving.
Yeah, the first book on collapse of China was in the year 2000. अभी 25 साल होने के हो रहे हैं और collapse तो हो नहीं रहा.
Or he talks of these, massive problems, accumulations of debt, declining returns on investment, property bubbles, state pushback against tech tycoons like Jack Ma, factories which are fated to bankruptcy, ghost towns, और जो पूरा वेस्टर्न प्रेस है उसमें ये सब संभावनाएं भरी रहती हैं. But why, he argues, why does this not happen? अब ये एक बड़ी विचित्र बात है. He says the policy makers are aware of the risks, but they are agile and responsive. China may be an authoritarian state, but it is a competent state. मिसाल के तौर पे वो कहते हैं 2017 में there was a national financial work conference, which is actually a conference of China's economic elites, which was chaired by President Xi, and deep analysis was done of how in 1989 Japan's excess lending led to the end of the reign of the Liberal Democratic Party. In 1997, how the financial meltdown led to the end of Suharto's reign in Indonesia. In 2007, how the subprime mortgage crisis, brought about ultimately Trump's sweep to power. They also diagnosed 1930s में जो Great Depression था, how it led to power transition from an exhausted Europe to a vigorous USA. तो मैं बात जो ऑर्लिक साहब रखते हैं, what I wish to reinforce, that they study all these crises in great depth. Xi is present all through the 6 days of the conference. And not that the state does not make mistakes. Their one-child policy has gone horribly wrong. But it is a competent state which is constantly making adjustments to take care to make sure that the bubble never pops. Smart economists and a whole lot of other policymakers, they apply their minds to it. And therefore, China sustains its phenomenal growth while apparently flouting conventional economic precepts. So, और वो कहते हैं in conclusion that China offers a balance of risks and strengths. Balance of risks and strengths in sustaining this economic miracle. And therefore, it must be taken seriously. China is a resilient adversary. There is therefore a lot to worry, or a lot more to worry than we sometimes do. वो एक और चीज कहते हैं, and many other observers say it, that जो recent जो China की policy में बदलाव आया है, they say China is now marching to the tune of left, right. Left on ideology, left on the economy, but right in terms of nationalism. This is all part of that broader strategic adjustment. It is carefully thought through because Xi is getting advice from his confidants who tell him, अब ये एक बात है जिस पे बात हो सकती है. वो कहते हैं साहब दौलत बहुत हो गई, enough of wealth. Your time has come to restore China to its greatness. They argue that Mao gave us the revolution, Deng gave us wealth, Xi will restore us to greatness. And how greatness? Two ways. One is reunification of Taiwan, and two is by emerging as the undisputed regional hegemon. अभी जो दूसरी बात है, they don't say it explicitly, but in many writings this is suggested, and they say there can be only one tiger on a hill and so on and so forth.
या इसमें डाउट नहीं है, और दूसरा टाइगर है इंडिया.
तो जो आपने वो बात कही सर, and this is where I say, while all indications suggest that he is interested in Taiwan, there is
He'll come to
nothing
India.
that rules out that he cannot be looking at India.
Actually,
After all, defection, yes.
Actually, if you see, in the past 10 years, ever since this thing, every time he's met Prime Minister Modi or he's come to India or Prime Minister Modi has met him anywhere, within a month, there's been an incident on the border. So
And that should explain Galwan and all that is happening.
Yes.
Otherwise, there is no other rationale why he should do what he's doing.
What he's doing.
और एक और बात which I found extremely unique. Most leaders, most politicians talk of the primacy of the economy, which also makes sense. But see what Xi says. Xi says, as important as economic prosperity is, it is military power that ultimately lies at the heart of state power. Now, this is a very unique. So, when we look at China through our lens, we wonder why it is not benign. But when China looks at itself through its own lens, it is not surprised as to why it is not benign. So,
look,
once
you actually you have underlined what I started with. We don't take Mr. Xi Jinping seriously. He's always spoken of security. He's always spoken of military prowess. He's always spoken of using the military to, get back to China's strength and restore China's, lost heritage.
I've also not heard of any leader in recent times who repeatedly tells his PLA that be prepared
for
to
war.
fight and fight to win. Somewhere else, I don't know whether the nuance has been captured accurately. He has said that fight only when you are 1000% sure that you will
win. Yeah.
And he has nursed the PLA. I can give you countless examples.
Yeah,
of
we'll
the PLA. And therefore, this brings me to the. So we could discuss this, or I can go on to the next.
No, we go to the next. We'll continue with these small things.
So the next point, sir, is that if China is this bubble that is not going to easily pop, these frequent predictions of its premature demise, jo ho nahi rahe hain, then now let us look at what is the important gravity of the China challenge. Ab isme mera manna ye hai, it is not that India is unaware. After all, we balanced to the north in a big way. We have narrowed his options along the LAC and the LC. Yangtze may well tell us that, salami slicing has come to an end. We are not a pushover. There are troop levels, reserves, technology. There is a lot that is being done on the LAC, LC. But mera कहना ये है कि China का the important gravity of the China challenge is so deep, multi-layered and sophisticated that despite all that we have done, we need a larger national security makeover, because the gravity of the challenge is deep and sophisticated. अब ये मैं आपको सर 2-3 points I would like to just reinforce. You see, there are the other arguments, and it could well be right. Many people say it's not fought a war since 79. It could be the social media fluff. It could be a parade ground military. If that is indeed the case, we have nothing to worry. But if it is not the case,
then we have a lot to worry.
We have a lot to worry. And my reading, my understanding tells me that it is a sophisticated strategic military juggernaut. It is not the PLA alone. The PLA, of course, is the armed wing of the CCP. with a lot of influence. But it is this larger, thoughtful enterprise of talent and meritocracy that we should worry about. अब उसमें मैं आपको दो चीजें बताता हूँ. The PLA's journey, in my view, has been a journey from humility to hubris. मैं आपको मिसाल देता हूँ. In the earlier part of the century, 2001-2 के आसपास, the chairman of the Chinese NDU said, we are translating every word that Andrew Marshall has written. Andrew Marshall was this great strategic thinker who advised 8 American presidents across the aisle. He says we are studying him greatly and we will do what we have to. And we of course know how they studied the two Gulf Wars and all.
Yeah.
That was human. 2 years back at an IPAC conference, Indo-Pacific Army Commanders, Army Chiefs Conference in Bangkok, this whole day the Americans were lecturing the Chinese on this freedom of seas and freedom of navigation. The Chinese general who was attending it in the evening comes up to me and in clipped English asked me, what do you think of this whole business of freedom of seas and all? I said, it's absolutely as per international rules of how we operate and so on and so forth. And look what he tells me, I haven't forgotten it. And I keep saying this everywhere. He says, General, if you have 43 military bases around you, and every day you send a ship to 12 nautical miles to see whether that holds good or not, is that coercion or is that freedom of seas? Now, this is what how the Chinese view American presence in the Indo-Pacific.
Naturally
so. And then he says, now see the hubris. He says, but don't worry, by 2035, the question will not be whether American ships stay 12 nautical miles of Shanghai. The question will be whether Chinese ships stay 12 nautical miles of California. Humility to hubris. Now, somewhere they are approaching that. Xi has personally nursed the PLA. He has spent 3 days in their infantry school, 2 days in their artillery school. He has stood up the strategic support force, the rocket force. The Americans are admitting that they are sophisticated enterprises. That is why we need to bother about the PLA. The CCP may be authoritarian, but as Kishore Mehbubani tells us, it's the world's largest meritocracy. President Xi himself got entry to the Chinese Communist Party in his 11th attempt. That's how difficult it is. Abhi wahan pe bhi critiques hai. Susan Shirk says that from meritocracy, they are moving to virtuocracy, which is bad. Which means unless you have certain political virtues, you cannot rise. But their meritocratic business, once more, people say that the Chinese diplomat today in Washington would have read the Global Times, he would have read the Washington Post, he would have read Foreign Affairs, he would speak 4 languages. The lazy American appointee speaks only 1 language. He doesn't even read the Washington Post. Now, if it is not an exaggeration, it is something to worry. You see that 1,000 talents plan, so I studied it very carefully. I was amazed. The stated objective is to recruit geniuses from all over the world. Xi says once again in that typical characteristic Chinese way, he says, without talent, it is like having a tree with no roots, a fountain with no water. He says the contest between superpowers is primarily one of talent. And then the 1,000 talent plan goes on to recruit people like Dr. Frank Ching-Ning Yang. Who is he? A Nobel laureate in physics. Nobel laureate. Dr. Andrew Yao, winner of the A.M. Turing Award. A.M. Turing was the father of
AI.
Code, exactly, sir. And these are linked to the CCP and to the PLA. Now, this is where their scientists are looking. Our scientists, unfortunately, our best minds are either sitting abroad, for whatever reason, we all know it, or they are focusing on internet apps and food apps. To create an ecosystem to draw them from these food apps into these future technologies. Because if we don't do it, this is the China that you are competing with. One more point about this 100-year marathon. I had heard of this, vaguely, but lately I reread this book. Now look at this staggering stuff that Michael Pillsbury tells us. He says this Chinese transition from a fragile superpower to a global heavyweight began in the 1950s. Now, this is amazing. Chow and Lai and Mao make repeated entreaties to Franklin Roosevelt and George Marshall, where they say CCP is not really communist. Give us time, we will become like you. All we want is weapons, technology, money, and of course, time. At one time, the Americans had a full fledged military presence in Taiwan. This is what Michael Pillsbury tells
Yeah,
us.
yeah, that's history.
They've dismantled it. Kissinger and secretaries of the Navy have given the Chinese satellite imagery, Mark 46 torpedoes, uh, US bombers and nuclear weapons to be located in China in the event of a Soviet invasion. So, more than peaceful, the Americans fueled China's rise.
Yes. This is
Perhaps
documented.
that they'll become.
No, no.
So look
In
at this
fact,
book.
if I may, the fact that China is a US aided economy and China has reached largely where it is thanks to the US help is documented. I mean, there are two, uh, and the Chinese have completely aped the American way of thinking and taken it to their own level. On that, there's no doubt. In fact, there's no argument also.
Just one more word, the so called peaceful rise, with many of us bought into. It is actually a masterly charade and a brilliantly orchestrated piece of strategic deception. You
Yes.
link it to what they say. They say, or that saying of the 36 stratagems, to cross the oceans, deceive the heavens. And in the fine print of it, they say that your deception should be so well orchestrated that the adversary realizes that he's being deceived only when it is too late. Now, when it is too late is exactly where we are. Today, the Chinese momentum is such that it is a little too late for America to reverse it. This has been,
Well,
once again.
that is a
I,
point of
I
view.
just, can I just complete it, sir? Then we
That's
just
a
argue on
point of
it.
view. We
Just
could
one,
debate that,
just one.
but uh,
30 seconds.
yeah,
So I just 30 seconds. So there's this book, Spies and Lies: How China's Greatest Covert Operations Fooled the World, where this Alex Joski documents how the Minister of State Security manipulated and fooled the West, an Australian Prime Minister, the US Congress, academia, business, think tanks, the US military, to obtain trade secrets, cutting edge technology, proprietary research, IPs, and military wherewithal. So, this is where today China stands, and therefore, this challenge is extremely grave. You were saying something, sir, we could
yeah.
debate that.
On that, I have no doubt. I'm in complete sync with you. That let's be clear. China has risen. China has risen strategically. China has risen technologically. China has risen in a 360-degree manner, without doubt. The difference between what has happened so far to what is to happen ahead is that hitherto China's rise was largely under the carpet, where people didn't know or were not aware or were willingly unaware. I'm using this word willingly unaware of China's rise, including in India, right? Even we were taken in largely, especially after the 2003 MOU on the border and Bonhomie, etc., YZ, and all that. We've been taken in. And today we are at a stage where we are seeing the real face of China. And what you have outlined as the import and gravity of the China challenge is as stark as it can be. I mean, on that, I have absolutely no argument or no second thought on. Right.
Now,
Henceforth, what do we do is the bigger question. How the second thing which I wanted to put across, which that is why I am doing this entire series on the China challenge, is that we don't know enough about it. We don't discuss this. Pakistan is the easier option to discuss. It is the most seductive option to discuss. Right? It is the more entertaining option to discuss. But the China challenge, as you have, as you have rightly panned it out, is the real deal. That is the deal which will make or mar India, how you deal with it. And like you said, history has not seen two powers rise together with a border undemarcated and in conflict. And two of the most populous nations of the earth and two civilizational powers. So conflict is and contestation is a natural outcome, and we need to be prepared for that. And that is my take on it. That the way you have dealt with China, you can't deal with it anymore. Yeah, back to you. Sorry.
Yes, sir. Just 2 points from what you
Yeah.
said. Yeah. It is my belief that Pakistan is the best and China is the threat. If that is not too crude, I would like to put it across. But the problem is where the problem occurs is that either China props up Pakistan or by a series of circumstances, our gaze by the turn of events is forcefully turned to the West.
Yeah.
For example, sir, this operational rebalancing would have happened years ago had 2611 not occurred. It was,
Yep.
as you know, it was very much on the cards. So, if something massive happens along the western borders, for force you have to shift your gaze.
No, I agree with you.
So
I
the
agree
challenge
with
will
you
become.
completely on that score. There's no argument at all.
Now, before we see, sir, what China's the challenge, the rise, what its impact on India, I would just very briefly like to spend some time on who is winning, who is more likely to win in the
Yeah, yeah.
Sino-American context, because from there
Sure.
we will. So
Yeah.
now, let's some military realities. Where has this China challenge led to? Two to three things where China has this huge edge. One is in these signature projects. One is long range precision ecosystem, and it is a very sophisticated ecosystem of global strike. And the second is this SSF. So let's see what this long range precision strike system has done to American capacities. The anti aircraft carrier ballistic missiles, the DF 21D, the manner and the accuracy with which they are going to target carriers and bases, they neutralize the carrier advantage completely. And I'm not saying this. US DoD documents,
Yes.
US
Yeah, yeah. There's no
and
doubt about it.
look how carefully they have looked at the American challenge. So they saw that America's power projection depended on its satellites, therefore anti-satellite weapons, and they are no longer technology demonstrators. They are getting inducted into their inventory today, this
Yes.
year. So what will it do to their power projection? Look at their land-based cruise and ballistic missiles by virtue of them not signing the IRNF treaty. Today they have complete monopoly, and in the hypersonic domain, which is between 100,000 feet to 320,000 feet, they have complete monopoly. The US is nowhere near the Chinese on the admission of General Mark Milley. The Chinese Americans didn't see this hypersonic domain coming. And here the problem is not only speed, the problem is the difficulty in detecting. Detection is so late that interception is, on current evidence, virtually impossible. Look at their FOBS, or their fractional orbital bombardment system. That has introduced the possibility of a nuclear vector through space. So land, air, the maritime domain, the triad, and through space. Look at, sir, the shipbuilding capacities. It is said that if China loses half of its navy today, it will take merely 3 years to rebuild. And the great American Navy, if they lose half of their navy today, they will take 20 years to rebuild. Now, this is how the military, gap is emerging. The world was focusing on owning the night. China said we will own the EM spectrum. They are the only power in the world which has created a separate service to give it independence, and then has gone and converged space, EW, and cyber. They are decades ahead of these thoughts of separate space, separate cyber commands. So the challenging aspect, what should worry us, is how they have been so far ahead in their ideation. And the SSF is central to the concept of informational dominance. So, in conclusion, sir, this new age PLA has not happened by a miracle. It is 4 decades of accumulated diligence and technological brilliance. And therefore, we need to see this, look at this PLA very carefully. Now, who is winning? Who is likely to win? As you said, the Americans also are great at innovation, great at creativity. So the contest is still wide open. There are many possibilities. But here is what should worry us. It's not a standalone military venture. Look at these estimates in economic terms. There are many people, Hugh White most prominently, who says by 2035, China will account for 24% of the global GDP. USA
That
will
is
account
contestable.
for a mere 14.
No, no.
So you can be off by 1 percentage point
No,
here
no,
and there.
Raj, I will go with you on what someone has quoted, but that is contestable.
Okay, fine. Contestable
That is
by a
contestable.
percentage point here and there.
No. It's
That is
contestable
the
by a
reality.
wide margin. It's contestable by a wide margin because that's an analysis which I have done very clearly, and it doesn't suggest anywhere that China is going to have 24% of the world's GDP. There is no evidence to that. I will contest that economically and mathematically.
Okay.
Right.
So let's
So,
go
yeah,
on to some
we'll
more.
move ahead. Yeah, we'll move ahead. I mean, look, it is
No, fine.
that that's a point of view.
Let
It's a
me
point
go
of
on.
view.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let me go on some, and this is from the foreign affairs, which you said
Yeah.
is a very good.
Yeah.
So now, look at its trade with ASEAN. ASEAN is just about $3 trillion. EU is $15 trillion. Yet, one of the most productive entities today is ASEAN. Now, look at
Yep.
these figures. In 2000, China's trade with ASEAN is $29 billion. Today, China's trade with ASEAN is $669 billion. USA, $364 billion. Last month's foreign affairs. Despite the fact that China has territorial disputes with at least 4 ASEAN countries: Brunei, Malaysia, Philippines, and Vietnam. Look at the BRI, sir. We see so much of criticism of the BRI. Now, if it's actually not working, I'd be delighted. But Foreign Affairs tells you 140 out of 193 countries have joined the BRI. In ASEAN itself, there are 53 projects under the BRI as of 2020. This high-speed rail, China has given to Laos and sold to Indonesia. Huawei 5G, while 3 have said no, Malaysia, Singapore, and Vietnam, Indonesia and Philippines has said yes. Now, see, this is what when I see this narrative that China
Okay.
is not resonating with the world. Look at Africa, sir. China accounts for 20% of Africa's incoming capital. And this whole critique that they employ Chinese, 70 to 90% of the workforce African. US FDI in Africa lags Chinese FDI in Africa by half. This is what the Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta said, January 2022. Our partnership with China is not a partnership based on China telling us what to do. We do not need lectures about what we need. We need partners to help us achieve what we require. He's telling the Americans.
Out of power, Raj. You're quoting a guy who's out of power, and the new guy is taken a different tack.
Yes. No.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but this country replace it with somebody else.
I
Larger African sentiment is to the Americans that don't give us sermons on democracy.
Yeah, that I agree
We
with
are
you. Yes.
looking at pragmatic aid,
Yeah, I agree
technology.
with you. I agree with you completely on that.
My last point is Latin America. Now, there, of course, USA still has the lead, but less Mexico, Chinese trade has overtaken US trade by $73 billion in other
Yes.
countries. This is in their home turf. Brazil's a staggering 2000 and exports to China were $1 billion per year. Today, it is $1 billion every 4 days. Now, this is the to tell you not only military muscle but economic heft. Economic heft. Now, let's look at the strategic military competition, military capacity between USA and China. What the US DoD is regretting is that there was a time in the 1990s they had 50 robust American defense companies. For a series of reasons, sword sown by Robert McNamara, who emphasized great deal on efficiency and process rather than outcomes, these 50 have been reduced to 5 non-efficient, non-competitive monopolies. As a result of which, the US Undersecretary of Research and Engineering, Michael Griffith, says that USA, from idea to full operational capability, today takes 16 years. China does it in 7 years. We know the Javelin stocks in Ukraine, 13 years worth of Javelin stocks have got consumed in 1 year. Both US and NATO are out of 155 millimeter artillery ammunition stocks. Because of their poor innovation, the Americans have now set up their Futures Command. Out of 44 key technologies and their subsets, which will determine the balance of power in the coming decades, China leads in 37. Most of the emerging technology except chips and semiconductors. Now, if even 75% of this is true, sir, it tells you that USA still has the lead, but China has the momentum. Can the US lead stop the momentum? Now, that is the moot
Yeah.
point. Look at that, sir. I heard that day General McMaster saying that we have become so flabby that despite a 5 times or whatever 3-4 times advantage in defense budgets, unless we downsize, we will not be able to restore the technology lead vis-a-vis China. They are talking of downsizing. In some of the newer domains like the cislunar space, outer space, space economies, energy, transportation, China is leading on American admission. The last point now, Taiwan, which is extremely tricky. What could happen here? Because in many ways, it does seem that this could be the defining moment in the Sino-American contest, big power competition, and it will perhaps decide as to who will be ascendant in the power calculus. I will now make a few points and then certainly very glad to hear what your views are. You see, today what is happening while America's verbal commentary vis-a-vis China is increasing in terms of the military play in Taiwan, its capacities don't seem to be so robust, especially in terms of deterring the Chinese, in terms of all that I pointed out about long-range precision, amphibious assault, and so much. This could well turn out to be USA's Suez moment. Now, the dangers have got coupled because of strategic overreach. A theater has got opened in Europe. A new theater could open in the Middle East if Iran weaponizes and Israel does something. So the strategic stretch of the USA, coupled with all its domestic problems, its own problems before its economy, seriously let us examine with any politician when America was not willing to step in militarily in Ukraine, will it step in Taiwan militarily? It may, it could, it may not. The political will is doubtful. Unless the military reassures the political class of complete overmatch, guarantees, which is not a reality. They cannot assure them of a complete overmatch. So, in the absence of assurance of a complete overmatch, the political will may waver.
Yeah, I agree with you. On that, there's no doubt.
And now let
But
us look at the yes, sir, yes.
but
The
the
Ch-
okay, finish. I'll
Now
go
look at
back.
the Chinese. See the military force as far as the Chinese is concerned. How do they use it? They create capacity. They coerce. They let the adversary repeatedly see reason, and that is why all those blockades and those missile strikes and those air violations, they are signaling to IPACOM that look at the military reality. You have lost your deterrence. Would you like to intervene? And in so posing the question, seek political terms. When IPACOM realizes it cannot deter, will it commit itself to a fight? So even from the Chinese standpoint, when I see it, Chinese standpoint, the advantage seems to be shifting in their favor. Now, what could
Yeah,
go wrong? Z has told them, or so we've heard through many nuanced writings, that he will get into a shooting war when there is only 1000% chance of success. Now, that kind of advantage China doesn't have. And if China gets into a shooting war while misreading the Americans and the Americans join it, and something goes wrong in Taiwan, there are, of course, equal consequences for Z and equal consequences for the Chinese part juggernaut. So that is where this whole business of who's
yeah.
winning, who's
I
cannot be said
completely
with certainty, but some postulates I thought I would offer.
right. I think you painted a very clear picture of what China is aiming at, what China is doing, how is its military prowess, etc., etc. But I think on the economic side, China is a bit overblown, right? And that is something which I'm going to go into a full detail in an episode separately. And for one simple reason, historically, for the past 10 years, China's GDP is only going down. And this is a fact. It's not right. And its demography is going down. A combination of these two will limit its economy. So, to that extent, its economic leverage in the future is only going to reduce. Right. But then China has changed, like you rightly said in the beginning. China has changed, and that's my worry. Why has China changed? Over the period of the 20th Party Congress, not very far back, and the two sessions, if you see their focus, the focus of the CCP is no more the economy. Their focus is military, technology, and diplomacy, which you actually brought out. Okay, they're not focused on the economy. The bet they are taking, which is quite apparent from many angles, if you look at it, is that the bet they're taking is if they reach their military, technological, and diplomatic objectives, the economy will take care of itself. Right? They want to get there before the demographic window closes on them. That's my analysis. Right? So that is the risk they are at. And in this risk, the question is will they go to war? Because if they go to war, and war is a very risky business intrinsically, no matter what strength you build up and put on the table, if something goes wrong, right, the consequences for the Chinese Communist Party are pretty dire. And you need to look at it, look at this external prism through the internal dimension. And that internal dimension is a bit shaky today. And that shakiness, we've seen it manifest on ground in China over the past 6 months. So things are not that thing. I'll go with you. I'll go with you 100% on the way the military muscle is being built up in China. There's no two ways about it. On the way they are building up their technology, like you said, in almost all fields except in the chip technology, they're not there. But I also have my reservations about their space capabilities. They're putting a lot in space, but if you count out the American dominance of space, I think we might be going wrong. Because today, in the LEO space, 75% of the satellites up there are American, active. And this is actual, right? This is not by a quote. So they're far behind in space. But what is important and what is worrying is they're focused on space. They're focused on militarizing space, which none of us else are. So that is the contradiction you see. With what they have, they're trying to maximize. Well, in terms of firing a DF-1 against a carrier, etc., it is to be seen because none of these weapons have ever been used in the history of warfare. Whether it will happen or not is something, but then the power dynamics of this entire story has a different equation. And to me, even that I would put aside, right? Something which is I will not say put aside, I will put it on the back burner. I would like to see what is it there in for us, and where do we stand, and what do we have to do, and if you, if I take the maximalist position which you have painted as far as China is concerned, what do we do? I mean, ultimately, we have to have a game plan to counter them, isn't it?
Yes. So
So the
before
floor is yours back.
exactly. So before I come to what we should do, just one brief comment on this Taiwan thing. You see, the principal challenge in this Sino-American contest is how do you manage strategic competition?
Yeah.
This strategic competition from overflowing into conflict. But when Taiwan comes, the issues change. In my view, Taiwan, when it comes to Taiwan, China poses an entirely different question. And the question that China poses is that if you, USA, can have a Western hemisphere of your own making, why can't we have an Eastern hemisphere of our own making?
I agree with you.
Especially when the power balance has changed greatly. We are no
Look,
longer that powerful in China. And
I
here
look,
it comes, this is also the quarrel with Russia, where whether we admit it or not, they are saying that we also deserve exclusive hemispheres. Please respect our spheres of influence. This
I,
business that you will go and stabilize every place and bring peace everywhere and bring democracy everywhere is something that will not hold water.
I,
And
I go with you
this
completely
argument
on this.
yes,
I go with you completely on this argument of what China and USA are up to.
and
That's
here
an
the
argument.
problem.
No, that's an argument. Wait, that's an argument, right? Which China and USA can sort out between themselves. Let me put it this way. The facts on ground at this point of time is notwithstanding whatever China has, notwithstanding whatever its capability to replace even half its fleet, it doesn't have the capability, it does not have the demonstrated capability of leaving its coast. For the very reason which you said, the number of American bases which surround China don't allow it to go far away. It doesn't allow China even to go beyond the first chain of islands today. Tomorrow, what happens, we don't know. Right? That's the state demonstrated capability. And like you said, every day a US aircraft carrier goes past along the first chain of islands, it is violating Chinese sovereignty. While the Chinese general might have told you that we would like to violate the American sovereignty in a similar way tomorrow, that tomorrow is yet to come. Right? That's the ground position. And what will happen in Taiwan is, like you said, whether America defends China the way it is stated or it is not stated, or it is stated in its perfect ambiguity, is a question mark. But equally, the question mark is the Chinese capability to take over Taiwan, notwithstanding all these demonstrations, right? Because at the end of the day, it's a question of 22 million people. And people matter and politics matter in China. And that's the foremost thing in China. So we'll leave that. I would like to get back to India because
India.
the crux of the matter is how do we
India.
deal with this behemoth which is coming across the Himalayas?
Okay. So, I mean, given what China is, what the state of its PLA is, am I suggesting that the Chinese are 10 feet tall? No,
No?
I'm not suggesting that.
No.
I'm saying that they are 5 feet tall, which they are what they are perhaps
Yeah.
biologically. They become 7 feet because of the extraordinary things that they are doing. We must acknowledge
Yeah,
that.
on that I have on that I have absolutely no argument at all.
In our response, if we don't appreciate the nature, gravity of the challenge, and we just respond incrementally, and we do not respond with a more comprehensive national security makeover, which is my principal argument, China will become 10 feet.
Correct.
And
100% with you.
therefore, we need to step up our game. We need to move our ambitions beyond the LAC and the LC and the LAC. A symmetric addressal of China is very much possible, by which I mean that it's not merely a function of budgets. Because after all, as I have long argued, America's defense budget is about 3 times that of China. China's defense budget is 2 point something that of ours. Yet, why is it that in similar budgetary differentials, China is causing displacement anxiety in Washington? We do not cause similar displacement anxiety in Beijing because we are not undertaking the other reforms, theater commands, more vigorous innovation, change in our strategic outlook, technology. All this is happening, but it needs to be done with far greater vigor, speed, and scale. If we do that, budgets are not the only constraint.
Yeah.
It is also my case now. We are already into 2023. By the time we get to this Amrit Kal, Vikasit Bharat, or whatever, it's not much time. So we have to now begin a reimagination in our strategic outlook, because the nature and character of a military structured to protect a $3 trillion economy is very different from what will be needed to protect a $35 trillion economy.
Yes.
So this transition in the mind, this ideation needs to begin now. And therefore, in my view, why theater commands are important, they are mere structural corrections. We need larger corrections. We need to step up our strategic game, get our grand strategic muscles going. And here now, if you compare, we need cultural transformations in terms of civil-military fusion, new talent pipelines, career mobility pathways, all that China is doing. Now, India is also thinking of a 1,000 talents plan. The HRD ministry is thinking of something. But now we can't have these standalone endeavors. They must be integrated with the MOD. So, civil-military fusion. We need to, as our ancient texts tell us, leverage Saraswati to create Lakshmi to nurse Durga. This is civil-military fusion. It is common sense. We need now Atmanirbhar Bharat is doing well, but the velocity of innovation, the velocity of capacity delivery has to change. And I will just try and drive home this point with two metaphors. One is space and one is nuclear. See, in my humble view, the space is no longer merely a domain for support. It is a domain of war fighting.
Yeah, that
People
there's
are
no doubt
preparing
about it.
fight and win. SSF, US Spacecom. The astrophysics for military leveraging of space is very different from exploration. Therefore, in USA, the US Spacecom today is larger than life in terms of NASA. NASA is confined to exploration. The task of securing NASA assets in conflict is that of Spacecom. There, this whole effort is being driven by Spacecom and the private sector.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Larger partner of Spacecom is Elon Musk and not
Yes,
NASA.
and your Starlink's program.
So we have now taken similar measures, but we may go wrong is that the DSA is still coy, it is shy. It needs to get far larger focus. We may not, create those large theater commands. We can create not brick and mortar enterprises, but smarter entities like Israel. But it needs to come into the central, what shall I say, the center of our thinking, because all these space and all, they are not esoteric strategic domains. They affect companies' quadrant battles. So this whole relook at space from the military perspective is something we need to do. The danger is that we are handing it over to DRDO. Now, DRDO has got no, and I've got nothing against DRDO, sir, but they have no domain expertise.
Then I agree with you.
We cannot be learning this business in a fight.
I am completely in
DSA,
agreement with you.
DRDO has to be this banyan tree, it has to be this mentor. And this will only happen once the military has a comprehensive understanding of space. Now, similar nuclear, sir, like you and I saw, there was this nuclear debate, used to be so rich. General Sundarji, Air Commodore Jasjit Singh, the military had a stake. Now, somehow, we do not
We will
debate it.
talk of it.
I'll now tell you the consequences of that. This business of China having a minimal nuclear deterrent is a thing of the past. They have decided that they need, for competition with the USA, they need a formidable nuclear force. So General P.R. Kumar will be talking about it. I just want to make two quick points. Look at them. They have created 3,000 kilometers of tunnels to conceal their ballistic missiles. They have spent close to $100 million.
Yeah.
This cannot be for a small deterrent.
Yeah.
They are no longer looking at mere city busting. They are developing precision capacities to take out from counter force, counter value to force. So they have two arsenals, one signaling at the homeland, one at the missile and bases around us. Also, this whole business of a thermonuclear weapon. Now, why it matters is that in Indian fission bomb, this is from Ashley Tellis. He's written a lovely book. And
look, I will not talk of it.
Yes. So this space and nuclear
will not talk of this aspect.
So these are just two metaphors to tell us that we need to do much more. Look at industrial capacities, sir. I pointed out Javelin, 155mm RT. Now we were talking of getting our stock levels below 40i. We need to take a serious reaching. So
I agree with you.
Ukraine has taught us entirely different things: stock levels, surge capacities. One last point is about precisionary. The defining metric in Ukraine has been precisionary, which is all about marriage.
My own view on precision is it's a question mark.
No, it's a big question mark because we similarly don't have the expertise of
because for the simple reason
marrying explosives with microelectronics.
Yeah, the problem with precision, which I have fundamentally, is the outcomes are not very great. The precision is great, but the outcomes have not been great. Battle is not about applying, inputs, but the outcomes which you get. Outcomes have not been great in Ukraine.
But the demand there, right from Javelin,
the demand is
demand has been for precision.
The lesson which I learned from Ukraine is that precision is required, but it is not the ultimate. And it doesn't give you the outcomes, right? So we'll leave that because that's again in the air, right? So to that extent, let me make a point. To that extent, this entire business of China going for precision seeking outcomes based on precision thing is also questionable. It it it's open to debate, right? The threat is there, but we need to have a holistic look. But like you said, you need to have an informed outlook, and you need to have an informed debate, and that is what I'm seeking more.
And the last point that I would like to make, sir, is this whole outlook of financial sector reform and so on and so forth. Our current structures are not designed to facilitate innovation.
Yeah,
So, a good example, sir, is look at the Starship. The whole principle of Elon Musk is fast prototyping, quicker tests, faster failures. And
yeah.
that's why he's got the launch cost down vis-a-vis NASA. So it has to be rapid prototyping and fast failures.
Unfortunately, we don't have this culture at all.
It just is all most other ministries are having it now. You see, Mr. Gadkari and others.
Yeah,
This just
look,
what needs to come.
again, the reality of our country, the reality of our country is whether you like talk space, you talk nuclear, you talk defense, you talk any strategic thing. There is no one who's prepared to put his foot in the mouth or
But
take
now
that
the time
chance.
is gone, we have no option.
No, whether we have an option or not, we
Yeah,
look. What you're saying is absolutely right. We need to do it, but someone has to make it happen.
exactly. So these are the issues.
Yeah,
Some of these issues which will be part of that larger national security
yeah,
makeover. Similarly, we could have a roadmap for technologies. At the end of it, I would just like to say one thing, and that just lasts 30 seconds. So, what we need to do is create a joint, technologically enabled, ready, optimized instrument of force. Now, these are one word descriptors,
yeah. I
but
agree with
we
you.
all know they take decades to create. So, look at readiness, how Russia proved to be unready. Look at jointness, we have taken 30 years. All these things, if we do as part of that larger national security makeover, we will ensure that China remains 5 to 6 feet tall. If we don't do this, then we should not complain if it appears to be 12 feet tall. That's all
Yes.
I should say.
Yeah. Uh, Thanks a lot. That was a great exposure on the Chinese way of thinking, the Chinese way of acting, and the Chinese way of going about strategically to create certain power dynamics in its favor. What General Raj Shukla has said is a picture, a maximalist picture, which confronts us. That's what we need to prepare for. But then, what we need to think, and what we really need to think, is lies around two words which General Raj Shukla has used, and I'll take it from him. You call he calls it the displacement anxiety. If China can create the displacement anxiety in USA, and if Pakistan can create the displacement anxiety in India, and if Taliban has created the displacement anxiety, or rather executed this displacement anxiety in with USA, right? Is there a case for us to create the displacement anxiety with China? That's the question. And to answer that question, what he has said is very important. It's not on the structures which he's spoken of or suggested, or on the deficiencies which he has suggested, which is important. The important thing is the ideas which he has projected, the requirement to rethink. I might agree with him, he might not agree with me. That's a matter of debate. But the core issue which he has highlighted today, and I'm glad, General Shukla, that you highlighted this, is that we need to change the way we think. Right? And we need to take ourselves a little more seriously. Today, I've always been of the opinion, if the question is, can the Indian armed forces defend the territorial integrity of India we are okay. We are modern enough to do that. We have always done that for the past 75 years, barring that odd thing in 62 and anything else debatable. Largely, the territorial integrity of India is safe. But are our armed forces capable of anchoring India's rise to be a power of consequence, whether regionally or globally? The answer is we have a long way to go. And many of the answers, or rather, many of the questions which General Raj Shukla has posed, need to be answered if we have to get to that stature. On that, there is just no debate, right? We can debate on China's rise, we can debate on their capability, everything else, but that's a different story. But can we change our thinking to create displacement anxiety in China, right? And that displacement anxiety need not be minimalistic, it could be maximalistic, or it could be from minimalist to maximalist. But that's a different story. Uh, for those of you who feel that, look, China, and I see the comments, a lot of comments, which say China is far ahead of us, and they can just walk over us, and they can do anything they want with us. I don't think so, right? Like he himself said, the Chinese are just 5 feet tall. They're working to make themselves 7 feet tall. But if you work, you could be taller. That's the major thing. And why? Why is this thing? Because most of the time we look at China from our perspective. What does China look at us? What is China's Jaldify on India? How does China look at us? I'll just flash 5 things from their media, and you'll get the flavor. As much as we are worried about them, they are also worried about us. Okay? Right. You look at it. They see Apple's investment tripling in India after the meeting between Tim Cook and Modi. They are worried because this commitment and this investment is at China's cost. It's going to hit their economy bad. If this happens and Dell also follows, which is on the cards, and others also make a beeline out of China, China's military prowess might just come unstuck. Second, we talk of a digital economy. This is what comes from China Morning Post. They say Indians ditch cash as QR codes and apps like PhonePe, Paytm make digital payments much easier. If you read in the subtext of this article, it comes out that China is far behind us. Right? And this matters because remember, people matter. And we are two huge civilizational powers. Third, they're worried. US supersonic bombers, when they have come to Kalaikonda, even for a demonstration, even if it is notional, puts the jitters in USA or in China. They're worried. Notwithstanding all the power differentials, if India and USA get together, they will be an overmatch for China. Why? You create a two-front situation for them. You have that capability. But to have that capability, I get back to the word which General Raj Shukla used, displacement anxiety. And you need to create displacement anxiety, you need ideation of a different kind. This is something which I never knew. As per the South China Morning Post, Indian Muslims have taken to family planning. And this population is coming under control, much to the narratives or the talk in our own media. And they're worried they're tracking us of this. Because if this happens, they have problems. I'll not talk of it. I'm sure people who are seeing this will draw their own conclusions. And this, housing. This article talks of the rise of real estate and re-rise of the housing sector in India. And this is set off against the continued slow motion collapse of the real estate and infrastructure sector in China. Remember, 25 to 30% of Chinese the economy is real estate and infrastructure. If that collapses, everything will come unstuck. Right? Right. With this, I'll not take questions because we've gone far over our timelines, and I don't see. And for the level at which we have spoken, I think we'll leave the questions for another day. Right? I must thank General Raj Shukla for outlining a picture for which we need to be cognizant of. We need to be cognizant of in a different plane. And we need to manage or rise along with whatever is happening in China. If we don't do that, we are in a problem. Right? Before I wrap up, your last words, Raj, and then I'll wrap it up. And then we can say goodbye.
Nothing at all, sir. I've said what I've had to say. Thank you very much. I enjoyed this thoroughly,
Yeah.
and that's all. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for the great ideas you've given us. I look forward personally for you to get back on this. We'll take another subject. We'll have another interesting debate. And
Surely,
thanks a
sir.
lot for everyone. Good evening and Jai Hind.
Bye, sir. Good night, sir. Good night.